I'm Joe Quinn, and this is the Sott Report. It's spring 2012, and the French presidential elections are fast approaching. As is the case for almost every other Western democracy, when the French people go to the polls, they are ultimately presented with a phony choice between the political right and left, which is to say, a single choice for big government and corporate interests. In France, there are two rounds of elections. The first round this year, on April 22nd, involves 10 parties or candidates. But long before the first round, the French population are well primed by the media for the real choice between just two candidates from the biggest, or rather wealthiest, political parties, usually from the right-wing UMP or the left-wing Socialist Party. This year, Sarkozy, as the incumbent, is the UMP's candidate for re-election as president. It's pretty safe to say that, for a majority of the French public, Sarkozy is a latter-day Napoleon wannabe. In fact, many people were surprised when Sarko the American managed to win in 2007, given his nauseating bling-bling approach to electioneering and his history of reactionary right-wing policies. But win he did, possibly with the help of a little tweaking of the electronic voting machines. Since he took office in 2007, Sarko the American has evoked little more than disgust from the majority of the French public. In 2007, when it became clear that he planned to fulfill his election promises to slowly destroy France's social welfare system, while simultaneously giving tax breaks to corporations and the rich, millions of public sector workers took to the streets in protest. Millions of public sector and private sector workers demonstrated again throughout September and October 2010 against the raising of the retirement age and pension reforms. On both occasions, Sarkozy arrogantly broke with tradition and democratic principles by dismissing the protests as insignificant and pushed ahead with his elitist policies. With Sarkozy having been implicated in several financial and criminal scandals, his hypocrisy was breathtaking. Personality-wise, the French president fares no better. With his conceitedness, frequent inability to control his anger and lack of humility, he doesn't exactly fit the profile of a statesman. So, you get the picture. Sarkozy's chances of legitimate re-election in May this year lie somewhere between slim and non-existent. Even Sarkozy himself back in February appeared to be predicting his own defeat. But there's a problem. Sarkozy doesn't want to become a monk. He wants to be president. History shows us that when unpopular leaders with totalitarian leanings need to convince the population to re-elect them, or at least begrudgingly approve of them, they create some kind of national security crisis that serves to sow fear among the population and push them into the arms of the totalitarian leader. This tactic has been used repeatedly by the British and American governments since 2001 in the form of repeated Islamic terror threats. So, by March this year, according to all the opinion polls, Sarkozy was looking at a more or less landslide defeat in the elections. Then, something unexpected happened. On the 11th of March, a French off-duty soldier was shot by an unknown gunman wearing a helmet in a suburb of Toulouse. The gunman escaped on a Yamaha T-Max scooter. Then, on the 15th of March, two soldiers were shot dead and another wounded outside their barracks in Montauban, 30 minutes north of Toulouse, allegedly by the same gunman. There is, however, no way to tell who the gunman was, other than the fact that he used the same make of scooter and wore a helmet. Then, on the 19th of March, a gunman riding the same make of scooter arrived at a Jewish primary school and secondary school in Toulouse at 8 a.m. and shot dead a rabbi teacher, his two young sons, and a 4-year-old girl. Witnesses of the broad daylight shooting in Montauban saw the gunman calmly reload his weapon and shoot one of the unarmed soldiers from point-blank range as he tried to crawl away. So we can assume he had professional training. In all the shootings, the gunman apparently recorded the killings via a camera strapped to his chest. Coincidentally, or not, the attack on the Jewish school came 9 years to the day after the beginning of the US invasion of Iraq. French police quickly linked the shootings and concluded that the same person was responsible for all three, although, again, as we shall see, this appears to be little more than a supposition. On the 16th of March, the day after the three soldiers were shot, French intelligence drew up a list of 15 known extremists in the Toulouse area. On that list was 23-year-old Mohamed Merah, a French citizen of Algerian extraction. It was later revealed that the phone, cell phone and email communications of Merah and his entire family had been bugged for several months by the French police. But despite Merah being under tight surveillance, it took French authorities 5 more days before they were able to identify him and find his apartment in the suburbs of Toulouse. During this time, it is claimed, Merah shot the rabbi and 3 children at the Toulouse school. This 5-day delay proved to be a propaganda coup for the unpopular Sarkozy, who immediately instituted a state of emergency in the southwest of France, rushed to Toulouse and went on a speech-giving extravaganza, where he played the role of the strong man in a crisis very well indeed.
Et sur le territoire de la République, on n'assassine pas des enfants comme ça sans avoir à en rendre compte. Et celui qui a fait ça sache que tout, absolument tout, sera mis en œuvre pour le retrouver et pour qu'il ait à rendre des comptes.
During this time, the entire French population was held in thrall and fear as they looked to Super Sarko to save them from imminent destruction. Hollywood couldn't have done it any better. French authorities were apparently so clueless about finding Merah that Merah himself, we are told, had to call France 24 News on March 21st to tell them that he was responsible and why he did it.
You received last night, while you were here in the newsroom, an extraordinary call from a man claiming to be the killer.
That's right. This telephone call, which happened round just after 1 o'clock this morning, was a young man who called the newsroom and said he wanted to take responsibility for the shootings in Toulouse and Montauban. He was very clear that he wanted to, he shared some very specific and detailed information about items that he had left at the crime scenes of both the shootings of the paratroopers, the first paratrooper and the 2 paratroopers who were felled at an ATM in Montauban. He also gave very specific information surrounding the circumstances of the shooting that happened at the Jewish school in Toulouse a couple of days later on. What he did want to make very, very clear is that he wouldn't say whether he acted alone, but he did say that the acts were carried out by a group or himself allied to Al-Qaeda operating in France, was very adamant that this was only the beginning of a larger campaign, said that the reasons behind the killings were twofold: to protest against the French law enacted last year that banned the wearing of the full-length Muslim veil, and also to protest against French military participation in the Afghanistan campaign. That he made very clear. He said that the victims were chosen at random, but he said that he wanted to target any agent of the state that was working within the state's auspices to bolster the French position in Afghanistan, or any law enforcement agency that had anything to do with or maintaining the ban against the full-length veil here in France. Some of the other reason he gave for the shooting at the Jewish school, which he constantly referred to as a synagogue, was, I quote, "The Jews kill our brothers and sisters in Palestine."
Hollande, thanks very much. Of course, no confirmation that the man who rang was the man, indeed, whose house has been surrounded, or that he had anything to do for sure.
As noted by the presenter, there's no way to know who actually called France 24, and for some reason, probably national security, the recording of the conversation will never be made public. So on March 21st, the French Special Forces raid team finally surrounded the tiny apartment of Mohamed Merah, and a 24-hour standoff ensued. During the first few hours of the siege, Merah supposedly engaged in protracted conversations with police and allegedly admitted to the killings. But again, the recordings of these conversations have not and never will be made public. Eventually, after using all sorts of psychological warfare tactics like detonating flashbang grenades, cutting off water and electricity, etc., we are told the raid team stormed the apartment on the morning of March 22nd. At this point, the narrative gets really bizarre. Initial reports said that Merah was shot once by a sniper as he tried to escape, guns blazing, through a window onto his balcony, and that he was found dead there. Then we are told that he had in fact been shot as he battled his way through 15 raid officers who were crammed into his 20-foot square apartment, even though the 15 raid officers were equipped with automatic weapons and Merah had only 3 Colt 45 handguns. Supposedly the raid team fired 300 bullets at Merah as he was running through the tiny apartment, but amazingly all of them missed him. Then finally, another narrative emerged where Merah was found dead in his apartment after succumbing to shots to his arms and legs. Here's a clip of what we are told was the final shootout. So what are we to make of all this? The only reasonable conclusion to draw is that the official story is a lie. The most likely scenario, based on the evidence available, is that Merah was shot soon after the police surrounded his apartment on the night of March 21st. At that time, it was reported that police blew off the window shutters of the apartment. Soon after, 2 shots were heard, and no more was heard from Merah. The following 12 hours of the siege story was pure theatre, designed to give politicians time to come up with a plausible story, which, we note, they haven't been able to. Within a few days of the drama, Mohamed Merah's father contracted a lawyer, Zahia Mokhtari, to take legal action against the French state for the murder of his son. Mokhtari claims to have evidence in the form of 2 identical videotapes that prove that the French police killed Merah to cover up his involvement with French intelligence.
L'avocate algérienne du père de Mohamed Merah souhaite relancer la polémique autour des conditions de la mort du tueur de Toulouse et de Montauban. Elle affirme détenir des preuves du fait qu'il aurait été volontairement exécuté par les policiers du raid. Viviane Hervier.
Mohamed Merah liquidé par les forces du raid, c'est ce qu'affirme Zahia Mokhtari, l'avocate mandatée par le père de Mohamed Merah.
Nous détenons 2 vidéos identiques de 20 minutes chacune dans lesquelles Mohamed Merah dit aux policiers « Pourquoi vous me tuez? Je suis innocent ».
Zahia Mokhtari affirme que ces documents lui ont été fournis par des personnes au cœur de l'événement qui voulaient que la vérité éclate. Elle a tenu à préciser qu'elle en réservait la divulgation à la justice française. Selon Zahia Mokhtari, Mohamed Merah a été manipulé et utilisé dans des opérations dont elle ne précise pas la teneur. Une version à l'opposé de celle du raid qui avait affirmé dès le lendemain de l'assaut avoir donné toutes ses chances à Mohamed.
The idea that French police needed 5 days to identify and find Merah became even more implausible when it was revealed that not only was Merah being bugged, but that he was also very probably a French intelligence asset. The head of French intelligence himself, Bernard Squarcini, admitted that during the siege, Merah asked to speak to a member of French intelligence that he knew by name. Merah is alleged to have said to this agent, "I was going to call you today. I had some tip-offs for you, but actually I was going to kill you." French authorities have also claimed that one of his grievances was the killing of Palestinian children by the Israelis, which, coincidentally, the Israelis had been doing right around the time of the Toulouse shootings. When EU Foreign Minister Baroness Ashton, speaking at a conference on Palestinian refugees in Brussels just hours after the attack on the Jewish school in Toulouse, said this.
It was in Brussels at a conference on Palestinian refugees where Catherine Ashton made the comments. Her spokesman denied she drew a parallel between Gaza and the deaths in Toulouse.
When we remember what happened in Toulouse today, when we remember what happened when I was in Norway last week a year ago, when we know what's happening in Syria, when we see what's happened in Gaza and Sredot, in different parts of the world, we remember young people and children who lose their lives.
It didn't take long for the Israelis to respond to Baroness Ashton's outrage of comparing the murders of Jewish children in France to the murders of Palestinian children in Palestine. I mean, how dare she? It was also soon revealed that Merah had travelled widely in the Middle East to places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Jordan and Israel. Journalist for the Il Foglio newspaper, Daniele Raineri, has claimed that a reliable source has informed him that French intelligence granted Merah freedom of movement across the Middle East and in France in exchange for information. In short, Merah was a French intelligence asset. The important point to remember here is that such intelligence assets are always tightly controlled by their handlers and their movements closely watched. Historically, however, such assets have also been used by intelligence agencies to take the blame for false flag terrorist attacks. One of the most striking pieces of evidence that Merah was not the Toulouse and Montauban gunman is eyewitness reports that the gunman was quite fat and of European descent. This is a picture of Mohamed Merah. Would you describe him as quite fat or of European descent? One final very strange aspect of this strange story is that one day after the first shooting in Toulouse, on March 12th, French political analyst and director of the political magazine L'Express, Christophe Barbier, appeared on the French TV show C'est dans l'air and said the following: "The only chance for Sarkozy to win the election is if an event outside of his campaign occurs. An international, exceptional or traumatizing event. Only a cataclysm that is capable of rallying the French people around their president can offer Sarkozy the chance of re-election." Mr. Barbier's comments were amazingly prescient, predictive even, because the major result of the shootings in Toulouse has been that polls are now placing Sarkozy in the lead for the first round of elections. Coincidence? Just 2 months ago, Sarkozy himself was predicting his own political demise, but now he's telling everyone to expect a surprise in the upcoming elections. The only significant event that has happened during those 2 months has been the staged terror attacks with Mohamed Merah as patsy. Actually, that's not quite correct. Right around the time of the standoff with Merah, more revelations about Sarkozy accepting large amounts of cash for his 2007 election campaign came to light. They were, unfortunately, eclipsed by the Toulouse shootings. To be honest, you really had to be in France watching the way Sarkozy and the media hyped the entire episode to get a feeling for what it was really all about. I mean, Sarkozy even had the gall to compare the Toulouse shootings to 9/11. That fact alone points clearly to the false flag nature of the entire affair. The fact is, 7 people were killed, but shootings aren't exactly unheard of in France. For example, over the past 4 months, an alleged serial killer has killed 4 people in the Paris area, yet there has been no sign of Sarkozy calling for a state of emergency or engaging in mass media scare tactics or making it a national event. What seems to be the case here is that the Toulouse shootings were part of a pre-planned, staged psychological operation by elements within the French government and intelligence establishment, or perhaps even a foreign element, like the Israeli Mossad, for example. Historically, the Mossad specializes in such murders to achieve political objectives. Basically, whenever you see an event like this, where Jewish people are shot by Arabs, the first place to look for possible culprits or for a hand in the attack is to Israel. Why? Because Israel is the principal beneficiary of anti-Muslim sentiment, however it is generated. It is through the Israeli government's long-term use and abuse of the Jewish victim complex that the State of Israel has been able to do so much damage to any hopes for Middle Eastern or indeed world peace. It is as a result of the repeated efforts by Israeli and Western governments to provoke division, fear and mistrust principally between Islam and the West, that today so many people are willing to accept or even call for increased totalitarian policies to keep them safe in so-called democratic Western nations. But have no doubt, these totalitarian policies will not, by any means, be reserved only for the illusory enemies that have been created for you. They will, ultimately, and in the near future, be used against anyone who dares to stand up against the psychopathic elite that currently rules our world.